This week, a flashback to episode 689, in which Kumar and I review the first 17 issues of Christopher Priest's run on Black Panther, starting in 1998. What did Priest contribute to the Black Panther mythos? Is nonlinear storytelling a plus or a minus? And more. This episode was originally published March 10th, 2021. First, don't forget to take our listener survey to let us know what we're doing right or wrong as we put this show together and choose our topics. Allow 5 to 10 minutes to finish it. The link is in the show notes. This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. How are you doing?
I'm okay, pretty good, yeah.
Yeah. Keeping straight which show I'm doing. Yeah, it's not Spider-Man 1963. It's not To the Bat Poles. It's not the Law of Equivalent Exchange. It's Deconstructing Comics. So this is one we've had on the stack for a while. I had wanted to revisit revisit for me anyway, the Christopher Priest Black Panther run.
Now wait a second. Before that, this was going to be the Ta-Nehisi Coates Black Panther.
Well, yeah, a couple of years ago, we talked about doing the Ta-Nehisi Coates. I don't know why, but it's pronounced Ta-Nehisi, even though there's an I there.
Okay.
Because he guests occasionally on a podcast I listen to, and they always call him Ta-Nehisi. So I'm like, what? Tallahassee? What? So I don't know. I don't get that. But anyway, yeah, we were going to talk about his Black Panther a couple years ago. And I remember I was trying to read it on the trip to the States that I made a couple years ago, not knowing that it was going to be the last for a while. And I don't know, I just found it really hard to get into because I felt like not only had he fallen into the usual prose writer writing comics trap of writing too much dialogue, but also it was this kind of semi-Shakespearean just like felt too highfalutin and too kind of dense and hard to get into.
Right.
And it was putting me to sleep.
Yeah, I think when novelists come into comics, it often... Remember Jodi Picoult had that Wonder Woman run probably 15 years ago, and I didn't read it, but everybody said it was really dull and not well written. There's a kind of almost arrogance about it just coming in from novels. For whatever reason, you decide to slum it in comics and really don't know how to script them for comics. Now,
I don't know if Coates has gotten better at it. I mean, he's still doing stuff for Marvel. I think he's been doing Captain America.
Yeah.
So I haven't tried it out. It's I imagine it's a little bit easier to handle than his Black Panther was. But, I had read the Christopher Priest stuff when it first came out. Well, sort of. So I remember it started in 98, and I didn't pick it up at first, but I kept hearing it was good.
Okay.
So this was when I was between my two stints at Yokota Air Base, and so I did not have an APO box at the time, but I ordered all the issues I was missing, which was, I think by the time I did it, it was like 15, 20 issues.
Okay.
So, of course, and I was married at the time, and of course my wife wasn't happy to see such a big box arriving of comics.
Interesting, though, that when it started, it was under the Marvel Knights banner, which was new at the time, and Daredevil, and the Kevin Smith Daredevil, and the Garth Ennis Punisher. And there was Inhumans,
the
maybe.
Inhumans.
Don't remember who wrote it, but it was drawn by Jay Lee, maybe at the start. And but I noticed that during this run of Black Panther, at some stage, pretty early, they stopped calling it a Marvel Knights title.
Well, it's the first year. The first 12 issues were Marvel Knights. Now, at the time, I had no idea what that meant.
Okay.
Because I think I was only reading like letters pages, and they just kind of assumed that you already knew what that was. Mm-hmm. But I actually had to read Wikipedia as we were preparing for this episode, so I could figure out what Marvel Knights was. It was basically Marvel was outsourcing some stuff to...
You could call it that.
To a company called Event Comics, headed by Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti.
Okay.
So those two were editing the Marvel Knights books. So it was being done outside of Marvel. Sort of. Very vaguely, sort of. I think it was basically they hired a built team, or a pre-assembled team of Palmiotti and Quesada to edit these books, I guess. But I remember at the time it was kind of the start of a very creatively kind of energetic period for Marvel. 90. I mean, the Daredevil book was really popular. I didn't think it was that great, but it was. And Garth Ennis' Punisher was really great and fresh. And then, by around 2002, that's when maybe even a bit earlier, that's when we got the Ultimate Spider-Man happened, and then the Grant Morrison X-Men and Ecstatics and all that kind of stuff started. It was a pretty good period of time. And Quesada took over Marvel about 2001, I want to say.
Yeah, and then it's sort of going downhill, but...
and that was when they got rid of the Comics Code then, when he took over.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's funny, too. This has nothing to do with anything, but when I went to a convention in Toronto in, I want to say 97, and it was just before the Garth Ennis Punisher came out. And maybe a couple of years before. I don't remember, but Palmiotti was there. And I said, it had been announced, I think, that Garth Ennis was on this, and I asked him some questions about it. I don't remember what. He said, "You're going to love it. It's really great." And I said, "Is it going to have the code on it?" And his response was almost angry. He says, "All Marvel books have the code." And he was really kind of terse and angry about it. I was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine. Whatever." And that's the end of that story. And then they did get rid of it pretty soon after that. And I was like, why was his response so hostile at the time? And I remember I met Garth Ennis at San Diego in 97 or 99. Again, it was before the book had come out. And I said, "What are you going to do on your Punisher book?" And he said, "Oh, I'm throwing a guy off the Empire State Building. I've got a flamethrower." And he listed off all these ways. And he says, "Don't worry about it. You're going to love it." And I was like, okay, that's cool. But anyway, that's the beginning and end of my Marvel Knights story.
Okay. So Priest's whole run was 62 issues, and I did read it to the end. But at the time it was coming out, I've got the entire collection in floppies in my long boxes. But it's a bit much for one episode of Deconstructing Comics. So we decided to take the issues that are in the first collection, The Black Panther by Christopher Priest, the complete collection, Volume 1, which includes the first 17 issues, which, as you noted to me, is kind of a random place to cut it off.
It's bizarre. Yeah, I mean, issue 12 is kind of a little bit the end of its run. It seems like there's an end of a storyline at the end of 12, and 17, but it's very, I mean, we'll get into the plotting of it, but it's very hard to stop anywhere because sometimes it's all told out of order, and it never is, even after issue 12, I thought, okay, now this storyline's kind of done. He's going to go to telling the stories in order, but he doesn't. He still goes into this kind of very random form of storytelling.
Yeah, well, as
you can't really stop it. Even sometimes I thought, okay, a storyline's done, and then I realized that, oh yeah, there was, when you get to the next issue or the issue after that, it's like, oh yeah, they never finished that plot line.
They never explained where the Hulk came from.
Why was that guy in that place? I never even realized that was a question that I should have been asking at the time. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, so they still have to tie that up. So you almost don't know where to stop this thing, really, if for a trade paperback. But anyway, yeah, 17 is random. But 16, 12, 18 all might have been random. It's impossible to say.
So I looked into Christopher Priest a little bit. Now, his real name is Jim Owsley.
Oh, okay.
And he'd become an intern at Marvel in '78, and was the first. He became the first African American editor in mainstream American comics.
Okay.
And he wrote some books. And I remember seeing his name on books when I was in like high school.
Wow, I had just assumed he was some hot young gun that had come in, but I guess he had been 20 years in the industry already, at least at that stage. Okay. And was he the first black writer on Black Panther?
Yes, at least on an ongoing Black Panther series. Okay. I think there had been one other black writer, there had been a mini series about 10 years before, which I think I saw in my research was written by an African American. Okay. But that was just like a 4-issue thing or something. Black Panther had not had an ongoing in like 19 years before the series started. Okay. In the 70s, Don McGregor had been writing it was like Jungle Action.
Right.
And I saw that actually Jungle Action started out as a reprint book of these like old pre-Marvel stories.
Oh, like Sheena, Queen of the Jungle type stuff?
Yeah, I guess. And Don McGregor said, why are you printing this racist stuff? Let me write some Black Panther myself. So they said, okay. So then he wrote Black Panther for Jungle Action. And, I mean, I wasn't paying attention to it at the time, but I guess it was kind of influential.
Well, I think that's it. It's certainly, I think a lot of the stuff in the movie that came out was based on the Don McGregor stuff.
Yeah, some of it. He created Killmonger.
Right. And I'd never read, the only Black Panther I've read before this was the first couple of appearances in Fantastic Four, which is probably in around the issue 60s, somewhere in there.
52 is his first appearance. Okay. 52. So
that's
actually
the only,
because I actually read 52 and 53 last night. Because so around the time that they were publishing Priest's Black Panther, they had this thing where like I don't know how frequently it was, every month or every 2 or 3 months, one particular title, and it would move around. They would have a 100-page monster issue. Okay. Which would be like this month's story and then some reprinted stuff. And Black Panther, I think it was Black Panther 38 was a 100-page monster, and they reprinted Fantastic Four 52 and 53. Okay. And also a Don McGregor story from the 70s. So I read that. I read all of those. I didn't read the front issue, the Priest part of it, but I read all the reprinted stuff last night.
Right.
Okay. So, where do we start on the actual Priest stuff here?
Well, I don't know. Let's start at the beginning. I mean, we only did the 17 issues, so I guess we could give a bit of a breakdown of the premise of it.
Well, so I guess the first thing I got in my notes is that this was the first appearance of the Dora Milaje. Okay. Which I've never said out loud before. But they also made it into the movie. Now, Priest's version, they're dressed like they're hotties from a blaxploitation movie. And all the subsequent versions, starting with the Reggie Hoodlin run of Black Panther that started in like 2005 or 6, they're in more traditional African dress. Okay. So I'm not sure why they were the blaxploitation version here, but an interesting thing to me is right off the bat, as soon as you made that comment, is
as with every Marvel comic that I read, I can never tell if a character is new to that issue or has been around for 50 years or 5 years or what. And like I didn't know about them, and it's like I had the same problem with, the Grant Morrison X-Men run, which you talked about several years ago. It's like, is this mutant a new character or one he's made new for the... There's just no way to tell. It's such a strange reading experience in that respect. But like there was a lot of like the guy who's the guy that ends up trying to take over Wakanda with the huge ears.
Achebe.
Achebe, yeah, was I guess he was a guy that's been around and not a new character?
I'm not sure about him. I kind of thought that was a Priest creation, but...
Okay.
I'm not completely sure, like, if he was in any Don McGregor stories or whatever. I think that he might have been new.
Okay. And, so we should also mention that the art in the first few issues is by Mark Texeira, who was kind of a big deal at the time. But there's a weird credit in the first several issues where it says Joe Quesada's storytelling.
Yeah, I don't understand what that means either.
Does that mean he was doing layouts or something and Tex was only following his thumbnails? Or I don't know. It's a bizarre credit that disappears eventually.
Yeah, well, so does Mark. I think it's pronounced Texeira because it's
right,
X in Spanish is like H.
But he used to sign sometimes as Tex. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, for English speakers, it sounds like he should be wearing a big cowboy hat.
Right. I'm going to say he's right off the bat because it's a comedic series, where there's a lot of humor in it. And his art's not quite the best match for it. Yeah.
And it's kind of painted. And I mean, I've never been crazy about painted comics because often they can look really stiff. I think in this case, it's not as stiff as some painted comics I've seen.
Yeah.
A little dark, though.
Yeah. But I mean, I really liked his stuff back in the day. And he had some work on Punisher, so I was familiar with him, and but I do like his stuff. I didn't think it was the best fit. Joe Jusko shows up for a few issues, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" And then we end up with some journeymen for the last several issues, maybe.
Well, yeah, starting with 13, Veludo and Ullman, they go for quite a while. Beyond 17.
And there's really, they're just very, I just feel like it's a common Marvel, not just Marvel DC, they'd have a hot book and they have the best artists on it, and then after a while they just kind of give up and put some, average Joes on there, when the book probably deserved to have a better artist in there.
Yeah, Sal Veludo and Bob Ullman. Yeah, I'm not crazy about... I mean, I think I found that I liked Veludo less well than I thought I did, because the muscular is just kind of out of control. Some people look kind of deformed. Like the Hulk, there's a shot of the Hulk that looks really weird.
Yeah, I know exactly the one you're talking about. I think it's a full-page splash, and the muscles are all... I mean, they're supposed to be wrong because it's the Hulk, but it's really weird looking. The proportions are not right somehow, or I don't know what it is. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah.
And then the story is being narrated by Everett K. Ross, who is a Priest creation. Although he had appeared... So Priest had also been writing a Kazar book at the time, or shortly before this, and he introduced Ross in that book.
Okay.
Where I have not read that, and Comixology hasn't gotten that far in the Kazar series. They've only got up to number 14, and it was number 17 that Ross was in. But according to an article I read, which I'm going to tell you what it is if I can find it in my notes. Michael Hoskin wrote, it's actually four web pages that he wrote on Black Panther on sequart.org about Priest Black Panther. I was surprised to see that the article was that recent for a run that ended close to 20 years ago. Yeah, so he had written about how in the Khazar appearance, Ross was, he was there as a lawyer and he seemed really on top of his job, but in here, now he's faced with this hero that he doesn't know anything about, and as he says in the first issue, he doesn't have any respect for him. Yeah. I mean that changes.
He's comic
over
relief
time.
In this series.
Yeah, well, yeah, and not only comic relief, but Priest felt like he needed to have Ross there because most of the readers of mainstream American comics are white guys, and he felt like it would be kind of hard to get into the series without him.
Interesting.
So this is quoting from Hoskin. Priest hoped Ross would not only help ease white readers into the series, but help preserve the lead character's inscrutable nature. And then he quotes Priest from somewhere. He could be the motor mouth, he could give voice to the skeptical readers and validate their doubts and fears about the series. And best of all, he could amplify the Panther's mystery and overall enigma, as his monologues would be, at best, a guess about Panther's whereabouts and motives.
That's really interesting, because that first issue especially is really the haphazard structure of it, with the story told completely out of order, really, as with much of that first issue, really puts you into a different culture, where there's different technology and all the morality about killing and Black Panther's strength and the languages they're speaking and all that kind of stuff is really, you're really thrown into it. It's very disorienting, deliberately, but I felt like it really did feel exotic, all that kind of stuff. So I think he got exactly what he wanted out of it.
And they're not even in Wakanda in the first issue. They're in America.
No, yes, that's right. That's right. And you're still like, what's going on? And these people are so strange and...
Well, and I had to think, I wonder if that's part of why I have not been able to get into other iterations of the Panther. I mean, not only Coates, but also Hudlin. I just didn't take to those series as much, and I think it might have been that it was just kind of throwing you in the deep end without a Ross life preserver.
Right. But I will say, I mean, after the first few issues, I really would have loved it to start being told in order. Once we were into it, I didn't really need that hand-holding as much, I think.
Well, and eventually, I guess it must be kind of after issue 17, eventually it becomes more sequential.
Right.
Some of the stories there's like so much detail to them. And, like around issue 9 and 10 especially, I mean, the story was so complicated, even if it were told in sequence, that I was like, what? And then... Yeah.
So, when they end up... At one stage, they end up inside a giant vending machine. Which is similar. It's something like you'd expect in a Batman comic from the 60s. And they have to get out of thing. And it's such a bizarre... It just comes out of nowhere. And this Achebe has built this giant vending machine for some reason as the death trap for Black Panther. And we're not really... I guess he's gone insane. A lot of the things are... You don't find out what has happened until the next issue when somebody explains. And, at the end of the first issue, this character shows up at the front door, and I'm like, I don't know who this is. It isn't until the next issue that it's explained that was Mephisto who's shown up. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it's really super disorienting, and certain things like the giant vending machine are maybe a bit too much complexity on top of what was already very...
Well, what I was talking about was, that Panther was trying to unravel this plot that involved like the Russian mob and and all this other stuff, and it was really
was that parody? Because there's a huge description of like all the arms deal. It's like it's 2-page spread, I think, and it's got all these captions explaining all the things that have happened, and it's like maybe I can find it in my notes.
Maybe a page like this.
It might be that one, yeah, where it's like, okay, then these guys bought these guns for this country, and then this was approved by the government, and all this happened, and...
Yeah, I'm looking at issue 9, where Panther has grabbed this, like, Russian mob guy, and he's running around New York, dragging him along in his bathrobe, and, Panther is just giving all this backstory as he's running around.
Yes, and it's this kind of very complex kind of CIA Oliver North kind of stuff going on behind the scenes, and the reasons that explains why this coup d'etat is happening in Wakanda. But I wrote in my notes, is this parody? Because I thought it was so complicated that nobody could possibly understand it in this 2-page speech that Black Panther makes. And the whole story is told out of order anyway. And I don't think we're supposed to understand it. I think it's supposed to be a joke.
Well, when I got to issue 11 and got to the recap page, and there were like 2 paragraphs of description, like, okay, I understand it completely now.
Right.
Why didn't you just say that before?
Yes. And I think 11 also, they explained that Achebe was insane. He went insane after he was separated from Mephisto, and that's like one of those things where I don't think they explained that when he was separated from Mephisto. It's always like, it's so the pace is so breakneck that there's like almost no time to think about things while they're happening. It like has to come after the fact. We have to, I forgot to explain this last issue. Yeah, he went insane because his link with Mephisto was broken or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean there's a lot going on, and who was that, the woman who appeared in one of the post Marvel Knights issues. She's like some kind of scientist, like Nightshade, I think she was called.
Oh yeah, she was a and she was a physicist.
Yeah, and she sprayed something on Panther that was dissolving his costume, and that just happened so suddenly. I felt like it needed a little bit more setup.
Yeah, that's it. There's no setup for things happen immediately. Sometimes a thing that happened before or after because it's not told in order. Mm-hmm. So even if there was a setup, the setup might come 5 issues later when you finally understand. And you don't even understand. There's this whole business with Bill Clinton, and you're like, what is going on? It's not like 3 issues later that you're like, oh yeah, all that stuff happened and you'd forget. I can't imagine having tried to read this on a monthly schedule. Even I was reading 2 issues a day, and I was like, what is going on? But I will say about that bit about the whole explanation of the arms deals and all that stuff that's going on is, I did feel like maybe it was also a kind of statement about the way African nations are treated by Western countries. There are some statements about race and about Africa and things, but they're very subtle in this series, because it's not if this had been a Marvel Max series 5-10 years later, it would have been very different. I think he would have gone deep on some of this stuff. As it is, it's very... You got to kind of dig for it, and it's fun when you find it. It's very interesting when you find occasional statements, but a lot of times it's just brushed off like this is a comic book for teenagers. Like, there's this whole thing about the ethnic wars being started by Achebe, whereas the reality is it was, the Dutch 100 years ago that it set up this whole... all the bullshit that we're having to, all the ethnic wars and things that are happening in Africa all came down from that. And I feel like if this was a Marvel Max series, it would have been more explicit about that kind of stuff. But I think Priest was trying to, he's definitely just trying to construct a kind of entertainment. So It doesn't really go super deep on any of that stuff. But when it does, I think it's kind of subtle and clever.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and the fact that Achebe is like a priest or a minister, I thought was significant. I wondered if it was kind of commenting on the role of Christianity in colonization and so forth.
Yeah.
But I think Priest was trying to, maybe not so much about Africa, but about race in America, to kind of comment on that kind of thing. And Ross, especially at the beginning, is, he has a lot of stereotypes of black people in his head.
Yeah.
And, over the course of the series, he kind of, grows out of that kind of thinking. But, and Priest wasn't sure how much Marvel would let him talk about that. And so in the first issue, he has Ross talk about Black Panther being in the Avengers and stopping by Avengers Mansion to get some ribs. And the ribs was kind of a pointed thing because that's a stereotypical African American food, and he put that in there to see if Marvel would take it out or not if they didn't. And he was really happy with that. And then, okay, I've got elbow room here. I can comment on racial things. And
well, he does. I mean, on page 1 of issue 1, there's mentions of a housing project and useless white boys. So he was kind of a little bit right from the first sentence. There's a little bit of juice in there. But there's also, they go to that big gala ball, and he says that there's no there's no black people at the ball except for servants. So there's a few little notes about that kind of stuff. But again, it's really very, PG's not the word, but there is like they keep saying Muv Stepper when they're insulting people. Muv Stepper. MUV Stepper.
Yeah, I mean, you know what it's supposed to be, or what it's referring to. I mean, it was still comics code. They weren't going to spell it out.
Yeah, but it's pretty funny.
Coming up, one way the story would probably be different today. Is Priest Panther against killing and torture or not? The purest Marvel character, and much more. But first, join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos, outtakes from To the Bat polls, and more on our Patreon page. Patrons donating $4 a month or more get access to hours of additional podcasts, including our current series on Jim Starlin's Captain Marvel work. Get all the info at patreon.com/deconcomics.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
But another kind of race thing, I think in the first or second issue, when Ross is saying he's in the ghetto and he expected a lot of singing in the ghetto because that's not what they're always singing in the ghetto on TV. He says, I'd been lied to.
Well, there's what about the riot? So this huge crowd assembles at one stage to hear Black Panther speak. And I think it's like tens of thousands of people maybe down on the streets. Yeah. And he's up on the roof, and they're worried about a riot happening. I wish I could find my notes or which issue it was. But it really struck me as if, like, now there would be no doubt that some cop would be the first to crack it. I mean, if this was written now, it would be the cops. Some cop would shoot first, and that's what would set it all off. I mean, there's no question in my mind. And he was kind of trying to be, let's say, diplomatic about it. And I mean, Priest was in his writing of it and being like, we got to make sure none of this crowd gets violent. Whereas the crowd were now, I think most people would agree, the crowd's not the ones to be most worried about. It's all the security there.
Right. Yeah, we're in a very different place now in terms of kind of public awareness of these types of things.
Yeah. But also the other thing I want to note about the series overall is it's very, very specifically of its time. And what I mean is that there's so many pop culture references that are 1998. Like there's mention of like Sinbad's talk show. Like that was like, how long did that last? 3 episodes or something? You know, and there's like talk about Jerry Springer and Pulp Fiction, and every time somebody mentioned a mini disc player, there's a Wu-Tang CD thing which is almost prophetic. There's some really funny reference which is almost a prophetic thing about the super rare new Wu-Tang CD. But it was really, there's a line about something like, somebody was so, it was Ken Starr with a subpoena was a reference. I can't remember what, it was like somebody was very desperately, someone was like eager, like Ken Starr with a subpoena or something like that. Yeah, but all that kind of stuff was so really dated it. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's in a bad way. I think it was for me at our age in a fun way. I think any 20-year-old reading this would probably be like, "What is going on?" and would struggle with it. But for me, it was kind of a fun. This is exactly where it is, and it was like there was no pulling back from any of that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, and I mean, not living in America, I'm not even sure I got some of those references at the time.
Right.
I didn't know Sinbad ever had a talk show.
Oh, yeah, very brief. And he makes some joke about you're so funny, you should be on Sinbad's talk, or something like that. And I was like, whoa, that's a deep cut. I should Google it. I don't know how. Yeah, I feel like it was very short-lived. I'm going to Google it right now.
I guess I kind of remembered that the series was a little confusing sometimes, but I remember liking it because of the humor, because of Ross, and because I think Panther's character was much better defined, I think, than, at least in my mind, he'd ever been before. I guess I hadn't read that many stories with Black Panther in them before this comic, but I thought, Priest really got a clearer idea in everybody's head of who Black Panther is, and gave him a lot of gravitas that he didn't have before. And I think Priest bears a fair amount of responsibility for stuff that made it into the movie. Certainly the Dora Milaje and kind of Panther's, the feel of the character.
Right. Did we ever find out what happened to Ross's pants?
Well, I think, it wasn't clear as day, but I think what happened was that when he ended up in the mud wrestling, that was where he lost his pants.
Right. Oh, right. You're right. Okay.
They were in that bar or something, and there was ladies mud wrestling, and and I think Ross and several of the other characters ended up in the mud, and he lost his pants.
Right. Okay.
But for some reason was not covered with mud. I don't quite get that, but... Right.
I just remembered, sorry to go back a little bit, I just remembered there's a whole discussion about why Black Panther was in the Avengers. And the Avengers as being these kind of fascists, and he joined them just to keep an eye on them or to observe them.
Yeah, he wasn't sure if he could trust them or not, so he was kind of spying on them.
That was really good, too. That was a really interesting It doesn't go too deep into it, but it's really interesting. And there's a point earlier, I think maybe a few issues before that, where somebody says, I don't remember who this says, like, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, they're not our heroes. And it's very much like that old Green Lantern, Green Arrow issue where the black man comes up to Green Lantern on the street and says, why don't you do anything for the black man, kind of moment. And, I love that bit, too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of Priest's Priest's thinking about Black Panther was that, he's secondarily a superhero, but primarily he's a head of state. He's a king.
Right. And he doesn't have a secret identity, which was interesting to me, because I didn't know that. I knew that from the movies. I didn't know it was the same in the books.
Yeah, well, I think that was true all the way back to Fantastic Four 52.
Right.
Yeah, it was never like, who is the Black Panther? Everybody knew he was King T'Challa, and I think in the Lee Kirby story, he said something that the costume was kind of ceremonial.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And that's certainly reinforced in Priest's version.
Right. Yes. Although it seems to magically appear and disappear, like he can just think about it and it materializes on him.
Yeah, I think that was something new with Priest's version, where I think it's that card that he carries around.
Yes.
That just changes his clothes. Yeah.
His little smartphone.
Yeah, before there were smartphones.
Yes. But it's interesting because when he talks to somebody and it's on video, the camera that's looking at them is like from somewhere else. It's not like a Skype call where you're looking at their face. It's like some floating satellite image or something. It's really, or it's like a drone image of them. It's really funny. But that thing seems to do everything right. I don't remember what it was called.
So you mentioned the thing about killing. I felt like that changed over time, because in the first few issues, it's like, in with Wakandan justice, certain people would be killed, but because they're in the U.S., Panther keeps telling the Dora Milaje, don't kill them. You can beat them up, but don't kill them, because we're in America. But like a few issues later, it's more like, even when they're in Wakanda, he doesn't want anyone to be killed. Like, okay.
And he makes a statement: torture, brutality, and assassination should not be tolerated. And I wrote it down. Those are his exact words. But every superhero that punches a person that's brutality, and torture to some degree. And it's almost, he's still, as much as Priest is trying to do, he's still trapped in a superhero comic where the solution has to be fists, and where you have to be torturous and brutal, whereas Black Panther can expound as much as he wants about how it won't be tolerated. And there's a character, he's like the white dog. What was he?
Oh, White Wolf. White Wolf.
White dog. White Wolf. So I know there's a dog type of thing.
Yeah.
Where he's his method is torture, and Black Panther is totally against it, but it's one of those hypocrisies of all superhero comics where, it's just as violent, really.
Yeah. Yes. So I was the article I mentioned that I'll link to. I think the second page of it talks about the White Wolf, and so he had been, I guess, the head of the Wakandan secret police, and when T'Challa's father died, T'Challa disbanded the secret police. There's a whole other complicated story there, and I don't know if White Wolf was a Priest original or not, but like before Panther was born, before T'Challa was born, a plane had crashed in Wakanda, and baby White Wolf was on it. What's his name? Hunter. And his parents died in the crash, and the baby survived, and T'Challa's father, and his wife adopted the baby.
Right.
And then Panther was born, and his mother died in childbirth, and T'Chaka remarried, and then, of course, he's killed by Claw. But, yeah, so there's this, what's his name? Hoskin writes a whole long article about how White Wolf, like, he's white and he doesn't appreciate his white privilege. He doesn't grow like Ross does.
Okay.
And he is kind of like, acting like he's kind of jealous of T'Challa because he's the actual son of T'Chaka and not adopted, and he's the king. And
isn't this the same plot of Thor and Loki and
kind
Zeus?
of, yeah.
Or Odin? Odin, yeah.
Hunter wants T'Challa to reinstate the secret police, and he doesn't want to. And he keeps kind of slighting T'Challa, like, I don't have an example in my notes, but, saying things like, just verbally, he'll kind of diss T'Challa subtly in a lot of cases.
Right.
Like, he doesn't really respect T'Challa, it seems like.
Right, yes, yeah. No, yeah, it's really obvious, and the dialogue's very well written in those, between them, it's very clear, the lack of respect he has for, the kind of underhanded obedience, let's say, where it's really obvious he's going to do his own thing anyway. I will say I really loved when the Hulk showed up. I thought the Hulk was very funny in this series.
Yes.
Hulk to me is the purest Marvel character. Like, you can really do anything with him. It's such a conceptually it's so perfect, and I love it when he shows up. And Queen Divine Justice is a great character we haven't mentioned. She shows up. She's kind of this American raised. She becomes a Dora Milaje.
Yeah.
She becomes a replacement for one, and she's kind of a black activist. And actually, she has some funny. There's a funny moment where Hulk's about to smash a car, and she's like, "Don't smash that car, smash those cars." And she points to the cop cars. So those are the ones that Hulk smashes. And it was just really funny, clever stuff. And whenever she showed up, it was really great, and her dialogue was really sharp. And it was not like it was when the first panel she was in was almost parodying her activism, but then it became, I don't know what the word is, not naturalistic, but it became, I started siding with her. I shouldn't say I was siding with her, but it became more sympathetic, maybe. It didn't seem like it was parody later on. Like when she asks Hulk to throw the cop cars, she does it in a way, it just makes sense. And it's great when Hulk does pick up the cop cars and smash them instead of the other cars. Instead of the poor people's cars, don't smash the poor people's cars or whatever it was in that scene. And he's really funny. His version of Hulk, I don't know what was happening with Hulk in other comics at the time, but his version here is he's just kind of like an angry kid almost who can be talked down. It's like, are you hungry? Okay, let's get some food, that kind of thing.
Let's go to the disco.
Go to the disco. He's very controllable if you just give him something that makes him happy.
But yeah, Queen Divine Justice continues on quite a while after 17. Yeah, she's a good character. We didn't mention when she replaced Nakia, who kind of got too much of a crush on Panther and wanted to marry him or something. And
that was a romantic subplot that was kind of going nowhere and was dull, and I really wasn't enjoying it. And because Black Panther's mind is controlled by Mephisto, and he kisses her, so she assumes that means that he's going to marry her. And it just went. It was just a subplot that was going on for issues and issues. And I was kind of glad when it ended. And I was very glad.
She comes back later, though.
Okay. Well, I was very glad to have Queen Divine Justice take her place because she was really a fun, cool character. Should we talk about Hydro Man?
Oh, right, yeah, Hydro Man shows up. Yeah, I mean, Priest still finds ways to get supervillains mixed in.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever read a Hydro Man comic in my life.
I've seen him in Spider-Man sometimes.
Yeah, he does, but I don't know if was he in the first 40 issues anywhere?
I don't think so. I don't think he goes that far back.
Right, so definitely this is a character I've not encountered, but I'm like, this character is crazy because his power is limitless. He can just turn himself into water and take over people's bodies, much like, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. We're dealing with this level of godlike power. And it seems his only weakness is that he's dumb, I guess, according to Ross or Black Panther. Somehow separating him into hydrogen and oxygen makes him more punchable. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in those issues. Very complicated character to handle because his powers are just too limitless to make sense, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how much of that was Priest's kind of take on the character to give it, because I'm sure whenever Hydro Man first appeared, he wasn't quite that powerful.
Right. Yeah, right. No, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, he hijacks that plane by leaving just enough gasoline in the tank, jet fuel in the tank to get it off the ground, and the rest of the tank is filled with water, which he keeps separate from the fuel by force of will. And then with all that water in the tank there, he's able to do almost anything on that plane.
Right.
Because he can control all the water. So we haven't mentioned, so Ross is, when he's narrating, he's reporting to his boss/girlfriend, Nicole.
Right.
And at first that just seems kind of like that's the conceit, but as we go through the story, we find there's more to it than that. That she, and actually I went back, when I got to 17, then I went back and read the first 5 issues again. And I saw that in that first issue, Ross does say, like, why don't you take this assignment to accompany T'Challa? And she, makes some excuse. But it turns out, spoiler alert, that she had a romantic relationship with T'Challa some years before. So she doesn't really want to see him. But eventually that they do meet. And Ross doesn't know anything about that.
Right. I think my biggest frustration with the series was stuff being told out of order and my inability to piece it together. But I have a feeling, from what you just said, that if I reread it, I bet Priest had it all laid out pretty tight.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think rereading it is useful. I wish that I had time to reread the whole 17 issues, because it might have helped it all fall into place better.
Yeah. Yeah, or maybe, yeah, or I should maybe I should scan the pages and reorder them myself to figure it out. But I suspect maybe it was tighter than it seems. But it was definitely, that was, for me, that was the frustrating part of it, if anything.
Yeah, at one point, Ross gets restationed to Iceland, and it takes several issues before we know, like, why or when that happened.
Yeah.
And I can't even quite remember if it ever did show him leaving Iceland or going to Iceland.
So, in issue 12, he's in Iceland. And you're like, why is he here? And this is the end of the first 12 issues. You're like, okay, this is bizarre. And then I have a note for my issue 13. Did Ross go to Iceland? So, I'm like, what? Yeah, I was that confused about it. And there are penguins up there. Are there penguins in Iceland?
No, they're all in the southern hemisphere. That was a goof.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, well, actually, the first time we see Ross in Iceland is way back at the beginning of issue 9.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, it takes issues before we kind of get the whole story there. And like when the Hulk shows up, it starts out with the Hulk, and then it kind of backs up again, and we don't get back to the Hulk until 2 or 3 issues later. And like I'd forgotten about the Hulk. Like,
yeah,
oh yeah,
yeah. Yeah. I loved, who was that guy, that Avenger? There was one Avenger when Black Panther goes to Avengers Mansion.
Oh, Justice. I don't even know if he's in the books anymore. I don't
know who he is, but I did love the moment where T'Challa comes in and he's like trying to figure out, is he Falcon? Is he Black Goliath? And that was a really good.
Yeah, Justice
touch.
Can't remember which black hero this guy is because he's never seen him out of costume.
That was a sharp little moment. I think that was pretty good.
Yes, and yeah, Black Goliath was still alive at the time.
Yeah, and he shows up. There's a whole issue where all the black heroes show up at once. When they fight this character called Cockroach, I don't know if I couldn't believe there's a Marvel Comics character called Cockroach, and I don't know if he was a priest creation or previously existed, but there's all these kind of blaxploitation guys that show up and one of them is like a snake themed dude.
Cottonmouth.
Cottonmouth, right.
Yeah, and Dr. Jericho Drum shows up, and Luke Cage, and...
Right.
Yeah.
Brother Voodoo, yeah. So, yeah, Black Goliath does show up at some stage in that.
Yeah. It's complicated, but I think reading it twice is a good plan. Then it kind of all makes sense, but...
Yeah. What else? The only other note I have here is there's in issue 6 when Kraven shows up. Hey, we love Kraven. For those listening to the other podcasts, Kraven shows up and Joe Jusko draws this close up of his butt that is so lovingly drawn, and it's just huge and fills a panel, and he's put so much care into it, and it was really funny, great. Strange drawing that was just in there. And he's kind of a masochist in this. He likes getting beat up. He likes the challenge, I guess. Yeah, that's about it, I guess.
So let me ask you then, does reading the first 17 issues make you interested in reading more?
Personally, I would say no, because the Sal Voluto art was doing nothing for me at that stage, and the plots were very hard to keep track of. I did like what was there in the 17 I read, but for me, I do feel like it was a bit restricted by being a Marvel superhero comic. It didn't. I am more interested, despite what you've said about the Hudlin series and the Coates series. I am curious about them. I have a hunch that they won't be as creatively kind of bombastic as this series was. But it's kind of piqued my curiosity, but there was a few drawbacks that kind of, I think especially the art really kind of dragged it down to just a normal superhero comic kind of level, whereas they should have put somebody better on there, and it could have been more transcendent.
Yeah. Well, like I said, if it does at some point stop being told out of sequence.
Right.
And then what I assume would be like the last volume of the Priest Black Panther collection is completely different.
Okay.
And I haven't read it in quite a while, but Panther is thought to have died.
Okay.
And his costume somehow lands in the hands of this African-American cop.
Okay.
Who kind of experiments with being Black Panther in the U.S. And it's, I believe, different artists too, and Ross isn't even in it.
Okay.
So it's quite different. I was shocked when he went that direction, but I'd kind of like to read those again too, just to see how they look to me now.
Right. I
remember really enjoying the series. I was a little frustrated reading it this time, but I mean, I still am interested in it. I kind of feel like reading the rest of them if I can find the time. But
yeah.
The Black Panther by Christopher Priest is published in 4 volumes by Marvel Comics. If you're enjoying this podcast, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics, and go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on X, Facebook, or YouTube. Via our site, you can also shop on Amazon to support the show and find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. In the show notes, you'll find a link to our listener survey. We'd really appreciate it if you could take 5 to 10 minutes to give us your opinions of this podcast. Next week, it's another episode of our former Patreon show, Tim Catches Up with the MCU. Mulele and I review 2018's Ant-Man and the Wasp. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.